Hi, I'm Linda from English Learning Mind Map. Today, we will learn about Barack Obama. Barack Obama. Observers often attempt to epitomize and galvanize collective aspiration when recounting Barack Obama because his trajectory condenses multiple narratives of identity, ambition, and transformation into a single, compelling arc. Over time, he did not merely participate in political life. He reshaped expectations about leadership, communication, and representation, creating resonance far beyond policy itself. Barack Obama refers not only to the individual leader, but also to a symbolic figure formed through history, rhetoric, and public imagination. To epitomize involves representing something in its most refined and complete form, and Obama came to embody deliberation, eloquence, and measured authority. To galvanize suggests stimulating people into unified action, and his presence mobilized engagement, particularly among those previously detached from civic participation. This central node establishes the narrative foundation from which all subsequent developments unfold, showing how identity and opportunity converged over time. From this overarching perspective, the story moves into formative years, where the underlying structure of his worldview first began to take shape. Formative years. Beneath Barack Obama, formative years helped negotiate and reconcile contrasting cultural, familial, and intellectual influences, creating a foundation defined more by inquiry than certainty. During this period, his identity was not fixed, but continuously shaped through exposure to differing expectations and environments, each contributing to a layered sense of self. Formative years refers to the early stage of life in which personality, perspective, and ambition gradually emerge through lived experience rather than deliberate design. To negotiate suggests navigating between competing influences, and Obama learned to move between cultural frameworks without fully belonging to only one. To reconcile involves bringing seemingly opposing elements into coherence, and he developed the ability to integrate diversity into a stable internal identity. This node builds directly upon Barack Obama by explaining how the symbolic figure originated from complexity rather than simplicity. These early tensions cultivated reflection, adaptability, and emotional awareness, which later defined his leadership style. From this evolving foundation, the narrative progresses into multicultural upbringing, where these internal negotiations became concrete, lived experiences. Multicultural upbringing. Emerging from formative years, multicultural upbringing allowed Barack Obama to assimilate and traverse multiple cultural environments, transforming abstract identity into lived experience across distinct social contexts. Rather than developing within a single, continuous framework, his upbringing required constant adjustment to new norms, expectations, and perspectives. Multicultural upbringing refers to this formative exposure to different cultures, including life in Hawaii and abroad, where identity became something constructed through interaction rather than inherited without question. To assimilate suggests integrating into surrounding conditions, and Obama learned to adapt his behavior and understanding while maintaining an internal sense of continuity. To traverse implies moving across boundaries, and his life involved navigating geographic, cultural, and social transitions with increasing awareness. This node builds directly upon formative years by turning internal negotiation into external practice, where identity was tested and refined through experience. These early encounters with diversity cultivated empathy and observational depth, both of which later informed his communication and leadership. From this broad exposure, the narrative deepens into Indonesian childhood, where these dynamics became especially vivid and transformative. Indonesian childhood. Extending from multicultural upbringing, Indonesian childhood allowed Barack Obama to immerse and encounter a radically different social reality, where daily life exposed him to economic disparity, unfamiliar customs, and new forms of resilience. Living in Jakarta was not merely a relocation, but a profound shift in perception, forcing him to adapt to environments far removed from the relative stability of earlier experiences. Indonesian childhood refers to this formative period in Southeast Asia, where exposure to global inequality became tangible rather than abstract. To immerse suggests entering fully into an environment, and Obama participated directly in local routines, absorbing both cultural practices and social conditions. To encounter indicates meeting something often unexpected or challenging, and he came face to face with poverty, diversity, and differing worldviews. This node builds directly upon multicultural upbringing by intensifying its lessons, turning broad exposure into lived confrontation. The experience sharpened his awareness of privilege and hardship, embedding a lasting sensitivity toward global issues. Moving upward from Indonesian childhood through multicultural upbringing to formative years, the narrative then turns into academic excellence, where reflection began to transform experience into intellectual clarity. Academic excellence. Moving upward from Indonesian childhood through multicultural upbringing to formative years, academic excellence allowed Barack Obama to cultivate and elucidate his intellectual capabilities, transforming lived experience into structured understanding and analytical precision. Education became not merely a pathway forward, but a lens through which earlier observations could be interpreted and organized into coherent insight. Academic excellence refers to his progression through higher education, where discipline, argumentation, and reflection converged into a refined intellectual identity. To cultivate suggests deliberately nurturing growth over time, and Obama developed habits of inquiry, critical reading, and sustained focus. To elucidate involves clarifying complexity, and he became increasingly adept at articulating layered ideas in ways that others could grasp. This node converted raw exposure into conceptual clarity, allowing experience to become knowledge rather than memory alone. The tension between observation and interpretation gradually resolved into confidence, enabling him to speak with both depth and structure. From this intellectual consolidation, the narrative advances into Harvard leadership, where these capacities were tested within an elite and competitive environment. Harvard leadership. Extending from academic excellence, Harvard leadership allowed Barack Obama to superintend and attain a position of influence within one of the most demanding intellectual environments, transforming private capability into public responsibility. His role required balancing competing perspectives while maintaining coherence, fairness, and editorial precision under constant scrutiny. Harvard leadership refers to his tenure as president of the Harvard Law Review, a position that symbolized both distinction and expectation. To superintend suggests overseeing complex systems, and he coordinated diverse viewpoints while ensuring intellectual rigor and consistency. To attain indicates reaching a high level through effort and recognition, and this achievement confirmed his ability to operate among the most capable peers. This node builds directly upon academic excellence by demonstrating how knowledge evolves into leadership when applied in collaborative settings. It also revealed his capacity to unify disagreement without suppressing diversity, a skill that later defined his political approach. Moving upward from Harvard leadership through academic excellence and formative years to Barack Obama, the narrative then turns into community roots, where intellectual authority became practical engagement. Community roots. Moving upward from Harvard leadership through academic excellence and formative years to Barack Obama, community roots enabled Barack Obama to enfranchise and rejuvenate local populations by shifting from theoretical achievement to direct engagement with social realities, grounding abstract ideals in tangible action. Rather than pursuing immediate prestige, he chose to work within communities where change required patience, listening, and sustained trust. Community roots refers to his early professional work in Chicago, where he addressed issues such as unemployment, education inequality, and housing instability. To enfranchise suggests giving people agency and voice, and he helped residents organize and advocate for their own interests. To rejuvenate involves restoring vitality, and his efforts aimed to revitalize neighborhoods facing systemic neglect. This node transformed intellectual capability into lived service, demonstrating that leadership must engage with real conditions. It also introduced the complexity of social change, where progress depends on collective effort rather than individual authority. From this grounded beginning, the narrative continues into Chicago organizing, where these engagements became more structured and strategic. Chicago organizing. Building upon community roots, Chicago organizing allowed Barack Obama to mobilize and ameliorate collective efforts within underserved neighborhoods, transforming individual concerns into coordinated community action. His role required balancing attentive listening with strategic direction, ensuring that initiatives reflected local priorities while maintaining long-term vision. Chicago organizing refers to his work on Chicago's South Side, where he collaborated with residents to address structural inequalities in employment, education, and public resources. To mobilize suggests bringing people together toward a shared objective, and he organized groups to advocate for meaningful change. To ameliorate involves improving difficult conditions, and his initiatives aim to create more stable and equitable opportunities. This node builds directly upon community roots by showing how engagement evolves into structured collaboration, where collective agency amplifies impact. It also revealed the limits of individual effort, emphasizing that lasting change requires shared responsibility. From this coordinated approach, the narrative moves into developing communities, where these efforts produced concrete results. Developing communities. Extending from Chicago organizing, developing communities allowed Barack Obama to institute and refurbish initiatives that addressed specific local challenges, transforming collective intention into measurable improvement. This phase emphasized implementation, where ideas were translated into programs capable of producing lasting impact. Developing communities refers to his involvement in projects such as job training, educational support, and housing improvement within underserved neighborhoods. To institute suggests establishing structured systems, and he helped create initiatives that could operate sustainably beyond initial organization. To refurbish involves restoring something to better condition, and many efforts focused on revitalizing neglected infrastructure and opportunities. This node builds directly upon Chicago organizing by demonstrating how mobilization leads to tangible outcomes, where collaboration becomes visible progress. It reinforced the importance of persistence, as meaningful change required ongoing effort rather than isolated action. Moving upward from developing communities through Chicago organizing to community roots, the narrative then turns into advocacy law, where his influence expanded into formal legal structures. Advocacy law. Moving upward from developing communities through Chicago organizing to community roots, advocacy law enabled Barack Obama to champion and litigate on behalf of individuals whose rights required formal protection, extending his impact from grassroots organization into institutional frameworks of justice. His legal work provided structured mechanisms to address inequality beyond informal negotiation. Advocacy law refers to his career as a civil rights attorney, where he focused on protecting liberties and ensuring equitable treatment under the law. To champion suggests actively supporting a cause, and he represented individuals and communities whose voices needed amplification within legal systems. To litigate involves engaging in formal legal processes, and he used the courts to challenge injustices and secure accountability. This node added a legal dimension to his work, where change could be codified and enforced. It demonstrated how community concerns could intersect with institutional authority to produce broader reform. From this legal engagement, the narrative continues into voter registration, where civic participation became central. Voter registration. Building upon advocacy law, voter registration allowed Barack Obama to orchestrate and augment civic participation, transforming legal awareness into active democratic engagement among previously underrepresented populations. Rather than focusing solely on protecting rights within institutions, he worked to expand the number of individuals who could exercise those rights directly. Voter registration refers to his leadership in large-scale efforts to register new voters, particularly within marginalized communities that had historically been excluded or disengaged. To orchestrate suggests coordinating complex operations, and he organized campaigns that required logistics, outreach, and sustained motivation. To augment involves increasing or enhancing something, and these efforts significantly expanded participation in the electoral process. This node builds directly upon advocacy law by shifting from legal defense to proactive inclusion, where empowerment becomes measurable through participation. It demonstrated that democracy depends not only on fair laws, but on active involvement. Moving upward from voter registration through advocacy law and community roots to Barack Obama, the narrative then progresses into political ascent, where participation evolves into leadership. Political ascent. Moving upward from voter registration through advocacy law and community roots to Barack Obama, political ascent enabled Barack Obama to engender trust and formulate policy within formal political structures, transforming grassroots engagement into institutional leadership. His transition into elected office marked a shift from facilitating participation to shaping decisions that affected broader populations. Political ascent refers to his rapid rise through the ranks of government, where his communication skills and strategic thinking distinguished him as a compelling leader. To engender suggests generating confidence or support, and he built trust among diverse constituencies through clarity and inclusiveness. To formulate involves creating structured plans or policies, and he contributed to developing legislative approaches that addressed complex issues. This node reflects the progression from empowering others to becoming a voice within governance itself. It shows how expanded participation can lead to representative leadership. From this emerging influence, the narrative continues into legislative service, where his role became more defined and operational. Legislative service. Extending from political ascent, legislative service allowed Barack Obama to promulgate and broker policy within structured governmental systems, transforming influence into concrete lawmaking responsibilities. His role required navigating competing interests while maintaining clarity of purpose and ethical consistency. Legislative service refers to his time as a lawmaker, where he worked on issues such as healthcare reform, ethics, and social policy. To promulgate suggests formally establishing or declaring laws, and he participated in drafting and advancing legislation. To broker involves negotiating agreements between differing parties, and he worked to build consensus across political divides. This node builds directly upon political ascent by translating leadership into action within institutional frameworks. It demonstrated that influence must be exercised through process, compromise, and persistence. From this active role in governance, the narrative moves into Illinois Senate, where his early legislative impact became more focused and visible. Illinois Senate. Building upon legislative service, Illinois Senate allowed Barack Obama to steward and underwrite meaningful policy initiatives at the state level, transforming legislative participation into targeted impact within a defined constituency. His work required balancing local needs with broader political considerations, ensuring that policy remained both practical and forward-looking. Illinois Senate refers to his tenure as a state senator, where he focused on issues such as healthcare access, ethics reform, and social equity. To steward suggests responsibly managing resources and responsibilities, and he guided legislation with attention to both detail and long-term consequence. To underwrite involves supporting or backing initiatives, and he played a key role in advancing reforms through collaboration and advocacy. This node builds directly upon legislative service by grounding abstract policymaking within a specific political environment, where results could be observed more immediately. It demonstrated his ability to translate principle into actionable governance. Moving upward from Illinois Senate through legislative service to political ascent, the narrative then advances into national prominence, where his influence expanded beyond the state level. National prominence. Moving upward from Illinois Senate through legislative service to political ascent, national prominence allowed Barack Obama to enthrall and delineate a compelling national identity, transforming regional recognition into widespread visibility across the United States. His presence began to resonate beyond policy details, capturing attention through clarity, tone, and vision. National prominence refers to the moment when he became widely recognized as a national figure, capable of influencing public discourse on a larger scale. To enthrall suggests capturing attention and holding it, and his speeches engaged audiences through both substance and delivery. To delineate involves clearly defining ideas, and he articulated a vision of unity and shared purpose that transcended regional divisions. This node marked the transition from policymaker to public figure, where communication became as significant as legislation. It showed how effective local leadership could expand into national relevance. From this expanded visibility, the narrative moves into keynote address, where this prominence was solidified. Keynote address. Extending from national prominence, keynote address allowed Barack Obama to articulate and transcend political division, transforming public recognition into defining national impact through a single, powerful moment of communication. His speech did not merely inform, but reframed how audiences understood identity, unity, and possibility within the American context. Keynote address refers to his speech at the Democratic National Convention, which introduced him to a national audience as a voice of clarity and cohesion. To articulate suggests expressing ideas clearly and effectively, and he delivered a message that combined personal narrative with broader national themes. To transcend involves rising above limitations, and his speech moved beyond partisan conflict to emphasize shared values. This node builds directly upon national prominence by converting visibility into lasting influence, where communication reshaped perception. It demonstrated the power of rhetoric to unify and inspire at scale. Moving upward from keynote address through national prominence and political ascent to Barack Obama, the narrative then progresses into presidential legacy, where influence translated into executive leadership. Presidential legacy. Moving upward from keynote address through national prominence and political ascent to Barack Obama, presidential legacy allowed Barack Obama to calibrate and mitigate complex national challenges, transforming rhetorical influence into executive responsibility at the highest level of government. His presidency required balancing competing priorities while maintaining coherence in both domestic and international strategy. Presidential legacy refers to his 2 terms in office, where decisions carried immediate and far-reaching consequences across economic, social, and global domains. To calibrate suggests adjusting carefully to achieve optimal outcomes, and he navigated policy decisions with attention to timing, scale, and impact. To mitigate involves reducing the severity of problems, and his administration worked to address crises such as economic instability and healthcare inequality. This node reflects the transition from symbolic influence to concrete responsibility, where ideals must be tested through governance. It demonstrates how persuasive vision becomes actionable leadership. From this comprehensive role, the narrative moves into landmark reforms, where specific achievements defined his presidency. Landmark reforms. Building upon presidential legacy, landmark reforms allowed Barack Obama to universalize and safeguard key aspects of social policy, transforming broad leadership into concrete legislative achievements that reshaped everyday life for millions. These reforms reflected both strategic compromise and ambitious vision, requiring persistence within a complex political landscape. Landmark reforms refers to the major domestic policies enacted during his presidency, particularly those addressing healthcare, economic recovery, and regulation. To universalize suggests extending access broadly, and his policies aimed to make essential services more widely available. To safeguard involves protecting systems from failure or exclusion, and reforms were designed to ensure stability and fairness. This node builds directly upon presidential legacy by demonstrating how executive authority translates into lasting structural change. It highlights the importance of balancing ambition with practicality, where progress depends on negotiation as much as intention. From these defining achievements, the narrative narrows into healthcare overhaul, where reform became most visible. Healthcare overhaul. Extending from landmark reforms, healthcare overhaul allowed Barack Obama to ratify and mandate a comprehensive restructuring of the American healthcare system, transforming policy vision into one of the most consequential domestic changes of his presidency. The reform aimed to address long-standing inequities while ensuring broader access and protection for citizens. Healthcare overhaul refers to the Affordable Care Act, which introduced new regulations, expanded coverage, and redefined how healthcare was accessed. To ratify suggests formally approving a system through legal processes, and the legislation passed through rigorous political negotiation. To mandate involves requiring participation or compliance, and key provisions ensured that individuals could obtain coverage while preventing exclusion based on pre-existing conditions. This node builds directly upon landmark reforms by illustrating how broad policy goals are implemented through specific legislation. It demonstrated both the possibilities and challenges of large-scale reform within a divided political environment. Moving upward from healthcare overhaul through landmark reforms to presidential legacy, the narrative then moves into global diplomacy, where focus shifts outward. Global diplomacy. Moving upward from healthcare overhaul through landmark reforms to presidential legacy, global diplomacy allowed Barack Obama to fortify and rehabilitate international relationships, transforming domestic leadership into a broader role within the global arena. His approach emphasized dialogue, multilateral cooperation, and strategic restraint, seeking to reposition the United States within an interconnected world. Global diplomacy refers to his foreign policy efforts, including engagement with allies, negotiation with adversaries, and participation in international agreements. To fortify suggests strengthening existing relationships, and he worked to reinforce alliances through communication and shared goals. To rehabilitate involves restoring trust or credibility, and his administration aimed to improve perceptions of American leadership abroad. This node shifted focus from internal reform to external interaction, demonstrating how leadership extends beyond national boundaries. It highlighted the importance of diplomacy in addressing global challenges that no single nation can resolve alone. From this outward perspective, the narrative moves into international cooperation, where collaboration becomes the central theme. International cooperation. Extending from global diplomacy, international cooperation allowed Barack Obama to adjudicate and foster collaborative solutions to complex global challenges, transforming diplomatic engagement into coordinated international action. His efforts reflected the belief that sustainable progress depends on shared responsibility among nations rather than unilateral decisions. International cooperation refers to initiatives such as climate agreements, nuclear negotiations, and multinational partnerships aimed at maintaining global stability. To adjudicate suggests helping to resolve disputes or guide agreements, and he participated in negotiations that required careful balance between competing interests. To foster involves encouraging growth and development, and his approach promoted long-term collaboration between countries. This node builds directly upon global diplomacy by demonstrating how dialogue evolves into structured cooperation, where relationships produce tangible outcomes. It emphasized that leadership in a globalized world requires patience, compromise, and mutual understanding. As the final node, international cooperation completes the narrative, showing how Barack Obama's journey extended from personal development to global influence, uniting local beginnings with international impact. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe for more English lessons.